So, tin. I have my filling here, and as you can see, it's much chunkier and almost a little gross looking at this point because that pectin and the coolness of the room is starting to kind of react. So this is about as gross as I would want this to look before I put it in my pie. Yours will be a lot smoother just because you have probably more in the bowl than I do and not as long. But anyway, so I've rolled out some pieces already. So I'm going to go ahead and you just lay this in, and since it's been in the fridge for a little while because I was waiting, so it's a little firm, so it's a little easier to pick up. But you're going to do the same basic idea that you did yesterday. Just press this / form it into the edge of your shell. I'm going to let all this excess just kind of hang out there. Okay? Okay. Sometimes when things fall, people fall right afterwards. It makes me nervous. And then I have this piece, which I deemed more appropriate for my lattice top. Ready to go. I'm not going to put my filling in just yet. I'm just going to like form it, cut my strips, and then put it all together right at the last minute. So for the lattice, you still want to roll to the same basic shape and size that you wanted for a regular just form in. And then you need to start cutting strips. So if you have a straight edge or a ruler, I know you guys have rulers in your kit, and then a pizza wheel or whatever you want to call this thing. And ideally, if you have, see my ruler's a little funny, it doesn't have numbers, but you would, you mark, straight edge, cut, just like you guys did in your chocolates class when you had to cut all those hand railings. I know that was so much fun for you all. But this ruler is awesome, and I only have one, so you're going to have to fight over it, because it has a mark right in the middle and you can see through it, so I can just kind of cut based on that guide because I like the width of it. You're going to go at about either a half to a little more than a half, maybe 5/8 strips, okay? It doesn't matter what you do, half, 5/8, as long as you're consistent, that's really the key, okay? So with this ruler being as cool as it is, I can just cut strips that are the width of it, and then go back and cut half out of that. You've seen maybe those tools, the tools that you can get, they're like a docker. You guys use the real dockers on rolls? Well, it's like a docker, but it has strips, so you wheel and it shreds out to a lattice. It's kind of neat. If you're doing a lot of them, I would suggest buying one of those. But there's nothing better than a perfectly latticed, like by hand pie. You know, someone spent the time and the energy, you know. You can charge more for that. So from here, the middle line of my ruler lines up perfectly with the cut marks that I made. And then I can just go ahead and just cut half strips, which is convenient for me. So again, you can fight over this thing if you want, or you can do a little cut and measuring if it works for you. I don't have any flour down on my table right now because I'm pretty confident I'll be able to pick these up. It's a little bit dry since it's been in the fridge. But if you have freshly rolled, you may want to do a small amount of flour just to save yourself the agony of trying to peel a strip off the table if it's stuck. Not a fun time. So from here, I am then going to fill up a pan. Now this filling is cool-ish. It's probably not cold, but it's at least not hot. It's not going to melt anything. You should be able to use almost all of it. All right, because ideally it's 2 9-inch pies that you've just made if you made it in a team of 2. But you really just have to kind of look at it and decide if you need to use it all or if you have to hold some back, because you don't want it to be like yesterday's, because it's not going to bake well. The lattice doesn't hold up nicely in a large dome. So you just want a slight dome to the pie, and you just want to make sure it's as full as it can be without being, like, you don't want it to be flat, you don't want it to be funky, so just a slight dome. I usually end up using almost all of it, and then I save a little bit to do at least one mini pie because I really like apple pie. and I don't like cherries, and I don't like blueberries that much. So I don't like to say I don't like them. They're not my favorite. I appreciate their flavor, but if I didn't choose it, I wouldn't eat it. So you're going to do either 5 strips across or 7. If you're doing a little more than a ½ inch width, if it's more like 5/8, 5 is usually appropriate. And if you're doing half, sometimes 7 is appropriate. But either way, you have to have enough strips, number 1, and you have to make sure that the width of your strip and the width of the space in between is sort of equal. All right, so I'm going to start with the longest one, and I'm going to go straight down the middle. And then I'm going to take something maybe a little bit shorter, and I'm going to try to match the width of this space-wise, and place another one. And then maybe a short one for the side. And go across that way. And then the same thing in the other direction. So that I end up with 5 stripes across. Because mine makes sense to do 5. If you do something thinner, it might make more sense to do 7. Alright, for this one I really want you to focus in on straight lines, even strips, perfect squares. Okay, when we do it, we're going to do a different pie later. You're going to do some minis, and then you can kind of get fancy with the angles and the diamonds and the width and whatever you want to do. But for this, I really want you to focus in on the correct width. Alright, from here I've turned it, and I'm going to start to do the lattice on the other side. So you take the middle one, you bend it back, and then not the next one, but the opposites, and bend those back as well. And it's basically a weave. Longest stripe right down the center again. And then fold everything back. Then I take the 2 opposites, fold those back. Just be very gentle with your dough because it could potentially crack as you're trying to do this. And then fold those back. And then one last time with the middle and the 2 outside. I'll show you a little technique at the end when I'm finishing it of how to hide it, fixing it. You usually just toss it and start with another strip if you have enough. But there's a way to hide it, and I'll show you. So you really want to focus in on these holes, the squares, making sure that they stay square and that they're relatively even all the way around, that you don't have some that are like this far apart, some that are that far apart. The other side, you start with 2. It's very cold in here, yeah? Back, and then you have the last 3. So it's a perfect lattice. Up, down, left, right, left, right. You know what I'm saying? And it's been weaved nicely. This piece right here, you start out. Doing this with apple is the easiest because apple pie filling is kind of light in color. When you're doing it with blueberry and cherry, the blueberry and cherry like bleed and it's hard to not get marks on the top of your dough. Just don't worry about it too much because they do go away. This one's not long enough either. So from here, I'm going to bend that back to kind of trim off the outside edge. So a sharp paring knife for this works best. And just kind of cut down right along the outside edge of your tin. Try to keep your strips in place, like don't let them migrate on you. then I'm just going to fork the edges, kind of like Mom used to do, you know, and just make sure that they're sealed, because if you don't seal them somehow or another, sometimes these will pop up and it just looks funny. So using flour, because a lot of times the fork will like stick in your dough, and that's not so good. And try to do it, you know, don't overlap too much, otherwise it starts to look a little bit messy. This also sort of evens out the second layers, because what happens if you have like a thin layer there and a thick layer there, thin, thick, thin, thick, some of it burns and some of it doesn't. So this is kind of helping to make sure that you have an even layer kind of all the way around. Done that, you'll want to take your knife one more time and trim again, because it tends to squish out and it doesn't look so clean. So this will help to clean it up one last time. And then, pretty much there, if you wanted to go completely plain, and that would be pretty much it, you would chill it, egg wash it, bake it. If you have some cracks, or if you want to get fancy, you can take some scrap pieces, because you're going to be rolling all of your dough at once. You're going to need to cut some discs for your mini pies. Alright, so I used my largest ring cutter. I just rolled out a piece of dough just like normal. And then I cut, and I had some extra pieces here, so I've saved them. And I'm going to use some of these fun cutters that I have, like that again, to just punch out some shapes. And you can do fall leaves, you can do hearts, you can do whatever you want. I've got lots of stuff, just borrow them there. So you can do a little cut, and then these, if you press the spring, this is what happens when you wash them. Gives a little mark into the dough. Alright, and you can, like, if you have a crack, you just put a couple there. I don't want the whole thing covered in cuts, okay, because clearly that's a problem. But, you know, a leaf there, an acorn there, something, you know, sort of nice is fine. Alright, if you do that, you can do it now. I might just pick them up and egg wash underneath them and stick them back down again, just to make sure they don't go anywhere. But you can do anything like that that you like, just to spruce it up a bit. Something like that, alright? So that's gonna go into the cooler, and I'm gonna let it chill for like at least 10 minutes, then I'll pull it out and I will egg wash it. Just to quickly show you how this works, you have that large ring cutter from your set, you cut out a little disc, place it in, just kind of same idea, just kind of press it in, try not to have a fold or anything like that. I have streusel topping. I want you guys to do at least one full top and one little mini lattice. And then after that, I don't care what you do. Alright, some people like to roll out dough and just use cutters and cut out a whole bunch of shapes and like kind of lay them over the top, sort of in a fashion, you know, sort of like as a lid with holes. So, you know, whatever, get creative. It's fine with me. So I'll take that one. That one's a little ugly, sorry friends. Lay them in, and then you have your fillings, which I forgot to get a spoon, so try not to make a big mess. With these fillings, the same thing with the apple. You want them full but not heaping, you know what I'm saying? You don't need it to spill out everywhere, it's kind of messy that way. And again, share amongst you all, so kind of pass it around. So when doing a full top pie, tart, miniature pie, whatever works for you, you want to make sure you have a vent hole. So this is where these little fun cutters come in. I always like to do the sort of quintessential blueberry pie. Kind of reminds me of Storyland. Has anyone gone to Storyland?
Yeah.
You know, they have that huge pie. I love that thing. I brought my son last summer and he like spent like 10 minutes running around in there sticking his head through the holes. I can show you. So I just kind of place it on. I don't know, I just think it's cute. Just like that. But you know, you can do different cutouts. You can even then like glue these back on, you know, a little design on the top, whatever works for you. If you want to get fancy and you have little fingers, you can do a flute on this. You just roll it. Try to encapsulate the bottom. Is that a word? Encapsulate. Grab the bottom at the same time. Try to roll it together. You have to be dexterous and you have to not make a mess, chef. So from there, it doesn't look like much, but if you kind of scooch it and form it with your fingers a little bit, I'm making a big mess of this filling. The one thing about a flute is that you always want to make sure it sort of sits atop the edge of the pie tin. If it hangs out too far over, chances are it's going down. Alright, so you want to make sure that it sort of sits in tight. And then from here I can do little fingers are sticking to it. And if your filling is spooging out like mine, it might mean that you may put too much in there. And go clean that up. Once you chill this, it's a little easier to clean up too, because everything has to be chilled. And then for this one, I like to do a mini lattice. And you can go with your ruler and your pastry wheel, or you can just kind of do it, you know. The width on this is not extremely important. You just kind of go for it. Try to be as consistent as you can. I like to do odd numbers on stuff, but I probably could do 4 across and 4 across if I really wanted to, but to me 3 makes more sense, so I'm just making 3. You guys are so quiet. And with this one, it gets a little tricky trying to make sure your squares are correct, so you can always go in with your paring knife and kind of move things around as you see fit to make it more even. And get a little angle and go for it. And then I would trim it, fork it, egg wash it, same old deal. Okay? Sound good?